right here in Baton Rouge. I did grow up in New Roads. We moved to Baton Rouge when I was in sixth grade, but we did have a period in there where we lived in Guatemala for a term. My dad is a dentist, and he did missionary work in this way. He went down to Guatemala and did dentistry down there. So me and my six brothers and sisters all moved down to Guatemala between my fifth and sixth grade years. We were signed up for 2 years, but there were 7 children, and the missionaries didn't realize how expensive it would be to feed us all. So after 2 months, they sent us back. They put us in school. So I got to see what it felt like to not know the language, be the only one that spoke English in the classroom, and learn the language pretty quick as a kid, but it was a very meaningful experience and taught me a lot. Ours wasn't the kind of missionary work that is evangelizing. It's more go and do dental work and speak about God when it's appropriate. But that wasn't the main thrust, was that we were there to evangelize in that way. We were evangelizing by way of serving the people there. My dad would get on a donkey and ride the donkey to where he needed to go to get to the people. And we were in a building that was still being built. We didn't have doors, and but we also saw people who didn't have floors, and we did have floors. And I really had quite an experience of seeing people that I would call my friends. You know, I'm in fifth grade, and just seeing how they live very differently than the way I had grown up. So it was a powerful experience for me. We also traveled in the country, so I got to crawl among the ruins, just up and down ruins as a kid, and experiencing that really opened my world up as well. The thing that I missed the most when I was there, I used to say, I can't wait to get home to hamburgers. I remember missing hamburgers when I was that age. But other than that, it was a joyous but scary, different. But my parents were very passionate about it. And so we felt like, you know, it just was what you did. It was just what we did. Yeah. And I learned too that people live in very different ways. There's a lot of disparity. So I learned that from a very young age. We came back, school started up. I was in fifth grade. Now that I think about it, I was in fifth grade. And that year, the nuns that ran the school in New Roads decided that they would integrate the school. And so we went from an all-white school to a school that was integrated. But the experience of that was that I remember going to the school of the children who were not at our school, at the other Catholic school for African American students, and just being shocked at the difference between my school and their school. They had a one-room wood structure. It was a muddy day, and so they laid down planks on the ground for us to walk, so we wouldn't have to walk in the mud, where we had sidewalks, concrete sidewalks at my school. And when they had the students from that school come out, they had them walk in the mud. They didn't have planks for them. They had planks only for us. And that really jarred me to the disparity in the United States. I was not aware, you know, but in fifth grade, I had my eyes really open to that. So once again, I was made aware. And there was a girl that was my best friend. She was a family of 6 or 7 kids. And they pulled out of the school, opened up their own school, a school that is there now, that is a private school. And that too was a lesson, because I thought they were there because it was a Catholic school. But to have them leave, nothing changed as far as the Catholic education. The only thing changed was that Black students would be joining us, and they left. And that again was another lesson at a young age of the disparities and the way people look at other people. And that really made an impact on my life too. Then we moved out to Central because of where my dad worked. They wanted to move closer to my dad's work. So we moved out to Central, and then I ended up graduating from Redemptorist High School. I know that's a thing here. Where'd you graduate? Who's your mama? But that too was an interesting education at Redemptorist, because we were the working class Catholics, is what we like to call ourselves. And so I got my Catholic education and got an interesting experience there as well. We were kind of taught as daughters, just get married. You don't need to have an education. You don't need to worry about taking care of yourself, get married, and then your husband will take care of work and bringing in the money. And then when I got married, I always tell my husband, I say, I am the woman that I am because I married you. He encouraged going to school. He came from a family of educators. He encouraged, every time I'd ask a question, he was just wonderful about answering it. He has a teacher's heart. And that just got me really interested. And I've always loved to read, just love to read. But I didn't focus on literature. I actually focused on linguistics, which to me is kind of an anthropological look at English. You know, how does the language evolve, and how does it form, and why is it different for different people? And so it was a different way of looking at English. I find it just interesting to hear how other languages, to discover about them, to see what they teach us, as opposed to trying to teach other people how to speak correctly or how to do it. I'm more fascinated by just the differences, you know, just understanding those differences. So that's what made me interested in linguistics. And then people would tell me, okay, you got an English degree, now what you going to do with that? And I said, well, I'm going to be studying language acquisition, because then I started having babies. So I went into learning language acquisition. But then after that, I did go get a master's degree from Loyola in pastoral studies. With a focus on spirituality. So I came back to that spiritual piece, but I've always connected the two, spirituality and justice and what's happening in the world. The two connect for me always. I find it very, very enriching to learn about all kinds of different faiths and different ways of looking at the world. The organization that we have is called Spirit and Justice because we're about spirituality, not about a certain faith tradition. I feel like the more I hear from other people, the more I get a better and better understanding of God. That there's not just one way to look at it, but I only have my one small lens. So let me look through your lens and see what you see, and look through another lens and see what you see. And so that broadens my concept of God and my relationship with God. And one of the things I liked about the program from Loyola, and this was many, many years ago, so it might have changed since I was there, but they started out saying this is about practical application. How will you use the knowledge you gain here in the world? And that really excited me. So it wasn't just about studying the history of the church or, you know, but how does this apply in your life? And that was really exciting to me because, like I said, my spirituality is all about what I'm doing in the world. And so that's how I think about it, study it. After 9/11, people had all kinds of fears and ideas about Muslims and what does that faith mean and all this kind of stuff. And at the time I was working at a Catholic church, and people had all these fears. And I went to another church and heard someone from Atlas, who is a Muslim, sharing about the Muslim faith at another church gathering. And he just so exuded peace. He talked about the moderate Muslim, that there are extremes, just like there are in every faith tradition, but that he wanted to really show that there were moderates that were very spiritual, and just share what their faith was about. And I was so moved that I said, oh, come do this at my church. So he came and did it at my church, and 50 people showed up. So people wanted to know. They were afraid, but they weren't like, I'm not going to be with this person. And they were like, well, let me go learn. I was so pleased with that response. He spoke for over 2 hours, and he said, look, I have to go home now. And everyone said, oh, please come back. I said, well, if y'all promise to come back, I'll have him back. He came back, 50 more people showed up. And after that, he asked me if I would help him to get, you know, his message out there, help him. They put together a dinner every year, a Ramadan dinner, and help him to connect with people that might come to that dinner. And so I did that. And then he finally said, look, we'd like you to go on a tour of Turkey with us. It'll be an interfaith tour of people from several different faith traditions to see all the many sites in Turkey that represent the Abrahamic traditions, all three traditions of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian. And so I went on that, and it was so enriching. I heard stories from my faith tradition that I didn't know. What I did was I took pictures, and I came back with a PowerPoint presentation to get the word out about the Muslim tradition and how it connects with the Abrahamic traditions. And I remember when the first time I showed it, a lot of the Turks that live here had family in town, and they came in, and some of them didn't even speak English, but they wanted to see what I was presenting from their country. And I'll never forget, the greatest compliment was from an elderly mother of one of the Turks who said, "I don't know what she is saying, but I completely understand it." And that to me really was crossing a boundary that you thought you couldn't cross if you didn't speak the same language. Then it reminds me of a story from Africa. So I ended up in Africa because I was working at Catholic Charities, and Catholic Relief Services wanted to bring people from America to see what they were doing in Africa and bring back word about what was happening over there. And so I went on the trip, and what I learned and began to love about Catholic Relief Services is that they are really about going into an environment, meeting the people that are there, finding out what the needs are, and building the capacity of the people there. One of their greatest goals is to leave that country, which means, or their communities, which means that they have set up such a good system of people taking care of themselves that they could leave. And so they could tell me how many countries they've been into, and they've been able to leave because they set up these environments. And so we went to their sites to see how the people were building mainly places, sources of water, wells, electricity, getting electricity where it never was before, getting generators set up, and how the people had to do all the work. They simply see our Catholic Relief Services simply there to help them to figure out how to get done what they wanted done. And so I remember a point there, again, with the language. There was a man that stopped me to ask me if I wanted to eat a potato. He had a potato. And what was wonderful was he was trying to show me that it came from his garden, that he had dug it up himself, that he was offering it to me. He wanted to know if I would eat it. It just was wonderful having this communication going on when neither of us could speak each other's languages. And that happened all over the country. In Ethiopia, I got sick actually moving from Tanzania to Ethiopia, and had to forego the experience with Catholic Relief Services. But I went from what was a macro experience to a very micro experience, because I had to live with a group of nuns for a few days, and they didn't speak English, and recover from being ill. But I'll tell you, so I don't know anything about Swahili. All I learned was real quickly, and one of the natives there shared with me how each letter is one sound, unlike English where letters have all kinds of sounds, but each letter represents a sound. If you learn every sound, and the words are made up of consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, that's every word is like that. And so I learned how to say the words even if I didn't know what I was saying. So what happened was I would go in with the nuns and read their prayer books and pray with them. And they were all shocked that this American knew Swahili. But I figured if they were praying, I'm probably good saying these words, and that I could say them even if I don't know what they are. It felt like I could join them in their prayer. So that was a really powerful experience. And I happened to be there when the whole community was having a big celebration at the church because it was confirmation day. So I got to see young women, children, I mean, the whole families were there. I saw women preparing meals, and children and high schoolers practicing their lines and their music. And it was amazing. And I would have missed all that if I hadn't gotten sick. So I remind myself that good can come out of bad. It can always, there can be a silver lining. So that was quite an experience in Africa. What I really really learned right away with Together Baton Rouge is the depth of relationships that have to go into this first. They did not launch until 2 or 3 years after many people meeting with each other, connecting with each other, building a trust with each other. People were getting frustrated because it's like, when are we going to do something? When are we going to do something? But building trust across relationships, across lines that have divided us for centuries takes a lot of time and patience and just crossing lines that we hadn't crossed before. So that happened before they even launched Together Baton Rouge. And it was powerfully important because one of the first major issues that we took on was public transportation. And it was a fight. It was a big fight. And we lost one church over it. And we had another church teeter on leaving. And that's why you have to have the relationships first, because you take on something that tough. I mean, that was during anti-tax, don't tax me, tax buster time, when we took on the fact that public transportation had no dedicated funding, none. They got about $3 million a year, but it wasn't from taxes that were dedicated to that. And then they had to go begging for all the rest of what they needed. What we learned is 10% of the voting population showed up every year and voted no for public transportation. All we had to do was raise the amount of people that voted. It just, when 10% vote and decide on something, you get a very different outcome than if more people vote. And so for years, this 10% kept saying no, no, no. And so our campaign was simply find the people who need the bus, tell them to vote. Don't tell them how. You don't have to tell them how. You just say, this is to create a funding source for the buses. If you need a bus, you might want to vote on this. We raised the voting population, the number of people who voted, to somewhere between 23 and 25% of the voting population voted. And it turned it around. We got nearly $30 million for the bus system at that election. And that was just bringing more people to the table to vote. People think it doesn't make a difference if they vote, but if you've only got 10% of the voting population and you raise that percentage, you've got a lot of power. Because if only a half of the voting population of your demographic votes, they've got more votes than the 10% that might have showed up before you. So I really learned the power of election and campaigns like that through that campaign, and what it takes. It was a lot of work, but it made a difference. It made a difference. So when we get to the year, like the summer, like 2016, one of the things that's really seared in my memory is there's a picture that we have, and it made the newspaper, of lots of pastors in the sanctuary of a church holding up signs that say, we will not be divided. And I think that made a powerful impact on Baton Rouge. When Alton Sterling was killed, there was all kinds of different people going in different ways trying to figure out how to do this. And when they talked about, violence and chaos and all this, I could look to my pastors that were involved in Together Baton Rouge, and they were about peaceful protests. They were about making a difference. They were about not dividing people, getting people, all the people that wanted to be together. And that's powerful. You can have all kinds of folks that are against you, but if you have enough people together, you have enough power to overcome the chaotic, those who are for chaos and for status quo power. You can make a difference if you get enough people. We do what we call accountability sessions. So we don't have candidates just come before us and tell us what they're going to do. What we do is we find out from our community what is important to you about a candidate, what a candidate can do for you. And then we go to the candidate and say, this is what's important to us. How do you respond to what's important to us? And one of the things that we challenged candidate Broome, Sharon Weston Broome, is, will you do police reform? So when she got into office, right now, I don't know if you've heard about the 8 can't wait, the police reform policies that just can't wait. You've got to do at least these 8. When she got into office, we presented 5 of them. She accepted 4 of them. And now we are one of the few places in the nation that has 5 of the 8 police reforms in place already. So that's the kind of work that we did in response to that. When the floods hit, we were receiving a lot of money. People believed in what we were doing, and it was a wonderful response. And so what we decided to do with that money was there was a lot of people that were out of work, and there were a lot of houses that needed to be fixed. So we found out what houses needed to be fixed, and we connected people who needed work, paid them money to go and fix houses. So that's how we spent our money. It's not the way that we usually work. Our work is mostly policy, but in that environment, we were adaptable. We got lots of funds, and that's how we used the funds. And so it really felt like a very productive way of responding. We had the setup, the scaffolding in place to discover who is in need. We had volunteer phone banking with people, just making phone calls to people, finding out what their needs are, making a database of what those needs are, making a priority list. If somebody was ill and elderly and needed their houses have the mold taken out, we just went after it like that as much as we could. So it felt like we were really making an impact on our community. So that's what we did with the flooding response. We're looking around and hearing all the issues and finding out what needs to be done in our community, and trying to find funding sources and figuring out what's going on with the money here. We have huge industry here that we should be bringing in huge amounts of tax money. And so why are we having funding issues? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't connect. What we learned from member institutions was that there was a program in place for the past over 80 years called the Industrial Tax Exemption Program. It was put on the ballot as a constitutional amendment that said tax breaks for cows, chickens, manufacturers, and things that people would say yes to. Yeah, I could take a tax break for that. But really what it was just a tax break for industry coming in. It was set up in a way that a state board was put together to approve the exemptions to take away property taxes from local entities. So the state board had no stake in saying, sure, you can get a tax break. They wouldn't feel it at all. We would feel it at the local level, but because local entities didn't even know that it was going on and had no role in saying, no, we don't want you to do that, then for all the years until we stepped in 2016, I think it was, they had been in Globo saying yes to everything. They 100% of the time said yes until we brought this to the attention of the governor, because what we learned, one piece of that constitutional amendment said that the governor had the right to veto those approvals from this board. And so we talked to the governor and said, you have power here. You're the one that has power here. And so he said, well, what I want to know is, how do the locals feel? So the first things he did was said locals have the opportunity to say whether they want these exemptions to happen or not. So then we had to go to the locals, the Metro Council, the sheriff, the school board, and tell them, you now have a voice here. They hadn't heard of it. They didn't know anything about it. And so we had to then educate them. We had to educate the public, because there was great pressure now on the local entities from these industries with their lobbyists coming forth and saying, you really want to give us these breaks? We might leave if you don't give us these breaks. So we had a big education campaign in that regard. One of the things that we really fought for was teachers had not had a pay raise in 10 years. In 10 years, and yet these industries were getting out of hundreds of millions of dollars of paying property tax that would pay for teachers. And so the school board said no to a few of these. The Metro Council started saying no to a few of these. But it was a battle every time, because the lobbyists were there every time saying, you better say yes, you better say yes. So it has been a really hard fought back and forth, back and forth. It is a long haul, and it's hard to keep up the work, because we're fighting against paid lobbyists from industries that are worldwide industries. But one of the things that really was put into place was they could no longer get a 100% exemption. That was how it had been for over 80 years, 100% exemption for property taxes for 5 to 10 years. And one of the things that Governor Edwards did change right away was to say, no more of that, you can get 80%. So 20% of that income all of a sudden is going into our coffers, and it has made a difference. One example right off the top is that the Sheriff's Department, after the floods of 2016, they had received an influx of money, and then they weren't getting that money. And so they were in the hole. The Sheriff's Department was in the hole for $9 million. When the governor wrote in that you would now only get an 80% exemption, 20% of that money started flowing in, the Sheriff's Department got $9 million. It was exactly the same amount. And so that was covered. And I bring that up because the sheriff is now asking for us to renew a tax to make sure the sheriff's getting the money they need from property taxes. But at the same time, the sheriff has said again and again and again to industry, yes, you may have this exemption. He has had the opportunity to say no, to collect property taxes from these industries, and he has chosen to say, yes, you can be exempt, which means the rest of us have to pick up the rest of that tab, means our taxes go up because others aren't getting exempt. And now we have a tax election coming up for the sheriff, and I want people to think really hard. I have always been, give money to the sheriff. We need the sheriff taken care of. But when I learned that he is allowing people to get industry to get out of paying these taxes, and I have to pay more because of that, I am thinking twice about saying yes to the sheriff at this tax election. I'd like people to really look into that, especially with all that we're talking about right now. Should we be funding the sheriff department at the level that we're funding it? What are they doing with that money? How carefully is it being handled? Because a lot of us just want him to have as much money as he needs to take care of, protect, and serve. But now we're starting to learn that that might not be the way it's used. And so now we have an opportunity to vote our beliefs on that. People ask it all the time, and it is so important to me to get this message out. For one, it's not just faith traditions, it's civic organizations, it's by institution. And the reason we do that is because it is a lot easier to organize a lot of people if you do it by institution, because you get the leaders of that institution and they connect with the people within that institution instead of this body trying to connect all these individual people. We can get a lot more people a lot faster if we have a whole institution that is working together with other institutions. For example, one of the very first things we did was there was a woman who talked about how the bridge in her neighborhood was closed down. One day she got up to go to work and it was barricaded, and that was the only way to get in or out of her neighborhood, and she just couldn't get to work. Neither could any of her neighbors. And when we asked her, well, how long has it been shut down? She said, 2 years. It's like 2 years, what have y'all done? And she said, well, we figured out there was this apartment complex that had the streets within it. The parking lot went into our streets and into Main Street. So that's how we would go. But she said, but 2 houses burned to the ground because they didn't tell the firemen how to get there. And so, so that was one of the first things we worked on. We got her a new bridge, but it wasn't just about fixing the bridge. It was about fixing the process. You can't just close down a bridge. You got to tell people this will close down at a certain time. You've got to inform EMS and fire and police how they're going to be able to get in and out of this neighborhood. You have to tell them how long it's going to take. You have to have funding. They kept telling this neighborhood, no funding, we have no funding, we have no funding. Well, we found the funding. The funding's there. You just need enough people power to come at the governmental entity and say, we want you to find the funding. We'll look at the books with you if you need us to. And we did. And they, of course, found the funding. But what happened after that was that neighborhood got it, that if they had been trying for 2 years to make change, and as a neighborhood could not make change. But when they came to Together Baton Rouge, they could join forces with other institutions. So what they did was they began to gather little bits of money, every little bit of money they could. They put it in an envelope, and as a civic association, they joined Together Baton Rouge. So there's all different kinds of ways that you can join. The social workers, Louisiana social workers belong to us. The Louisiana Association of Educators belongs to us. If you're a teacher, you are in Together Baton Rouge. So there's all kinds of ways that you can find ways to get in. One of the reasons, not the main reason, but one of the reasons I started Spirit and Justice is because I met so many people, individuals that I just got excited about and found very interesting, who were not connected to an institution. And so through Spirit and Justice, we pay dues. And if you join Spirit and Justice, you are a part of Together Baton Rouge. Where are all the young people? People often say that to me. And when they do, this is my answer: invite one. Invite one. Don't stand back and throw stones and say, why don't you have young people? If you wonder about that, then bring them, because it is wide open. And I mean, we have space for everyone. As a matter of fact, one person comes to mind in particular, a young woman who got involved in the ITEP issue, and she was very excited about it. You'll see her on the Together Baton Rouge website because we videotaped a presentation that she made on that issue. She was fabulous. And then she was hired in a very important position from that situation that she had presented. I want to say so much more, but it's, you know, but I was just thinking of there was another young person who had a similar experience. It's a great way to connect with people, to learn about what's going on in our city, to do justice work, but to also do that networking that can get you doing the kind of work you have a passion about. So we have nonprofits like mine that join. It's not just faith-based. Mine just happens to be, because that's the connection I have is between spirituality and justice. But there are other institutions that are not faith-based that belong to Together Baton Rouge as well. Well, the way Spirit and Justice began was I started having conversations with people one-on-one that I saw where I saw as spiritual people that did justice work. From my heart, I struggled with going to church and not being able to talk about justice, going to justice environments and not talking about God. And it's like, I don't know how to do that. They connect for me. So I started meeting people that it connected with. And so I would talk to them about, do you get the nurturing you need to do the justice work you need to have your spiritual self fed and nurtured? Do you feel that connection? Do you feel the disconnect when you go in these different environments? So I would have these conversations, and then at the end of it, I would say, I bet you know somebody else that's like that, just one other person. And then they'd tell me one other person, and I'd go meet that person. And till I met with about 50 people. And I said, okay, let's get together and figure out what we can do with this. You know, we got this many people that need this kind of an environment and are looking for this kind of community. Now what? So we set a date for when we would meet, and we picked July 5th, 2016. We woke up that morning to find that Alton Sterling had been killed. And my first thought was, do you just go on having meetings like nothing significant has happened in your community? Or do you readjust immediately because this is big? And so I thought about that, and it was like, this group that's forming is about this very thing. Our spirituality tells us we have to do something. We have to. And so I called the group together anyway, and I said, we're going to have this meeting, but we're not going to have the kind of meetings that I've been to where you just don't bring up the topic, or you say, oh, let's talk about it for a minute, now let's get to business. It's like, no, this is why we are meeting, because this has happened in our community and we cannot be quiet anymore. And it was a powerful, powerful meeting. And we talked about what we would do next. We wanted to gather more people together to talk about this connection between spirit and justice. We picked another date to get a bigger group of people together. The date we picked was the day we woke up to floods. It wasn't going to happen that day. But again, it just confirmed the need for what we were building. It just really confirmed the need for what we were building. Another thing that happened was I talked to Blacks and to whites, and the first time we set up the first big meeting, it was mostly whites that were coming. And in my way, I prayed, God, okay, this is not how I want it to be. I want it to be more balanced. And I really prayed about getting a balance there. And I could only do so much. I felt like the rest of it was the Spirit had to make this happen. The very first gathering that we had, we did an exercise on what does it feel like to speak with one another with compassion? Because before we started talking to each other, we needed to really steep ourselves in, I'm going to speak with compassion. And the exercise required that two people match up with each other and talk to each other. So I said, try to not do it with someone who looks like you, but someone who looks different, and match up. Well, everyone, I mean, we had 50-50 black, white, and I could not have made that happen. I mean, it was white and black all the way down the line, except for one group that had 3. And I found out later, and this is a total God moment for me, I could not have made this happen, but 3 people were sitting together, a black, a white, and a woman who does not self-identify with each. Her father's from Sri Lanka. Her mother's from Ireland. And for her to match up was kind of tricky. So she ended up in a group of 3. And it just matched up so perfectly that I just knew we were onto something. And from that, we've just had lots and lots of conversations between Blacks and whites, building trust, and Latinx as well. We had Latinx that have joined us, just having really deep, hard conversations, recognizing from the get-go that everyone there had a deep spirituality, that this came from a spiritual place, that they were not people that were not, that could just be presumed that the person you're talking to has a deep spirituality, because we really did, at the very beginning, we're very intentional about having these one-on-one conversations and learning where people were spiritually. And then we started every meeting for many, many months with the compassion exercise. You had to do that first, so you got in the right space. And we created rituals, and now what we're doing is we just been through a series of programs by Just Faith. That's an organization out of Tennessee that's been around for about 30 years. They started by teaching the Catholic social teachings to Catholics, because we don't know our social teachings very well. And they had a wonderful 9-month program to steep yourself in the social teachings of the church. But then they started making modules on different topics. They started becoming more ecumenical. They're not necessarily interfaith in that they are pretty much Christian, but it can easily be adapted. And just in the past year, we were like almost a pilot program of a series on racial justice. We were like one of the very first groups that did their series on racial justice. And there are 3 in the series, 3 8-week programs. And we have about 30 people going through it. It's a very, very difficult program, but it is very meaningful and impactful. So I'm excited about what that program is doing. Another program that we've done is called Word and Deed, bringing people together from different demographics to have these hard conversations. One of the things we did together was we went to Whitney Plantation. It tells the story of the slaves, the slave story, as opposed to the plantation owner's story. It's a very, very powerful experience of immersing yourself in the history of slavery. And afterwards we had we took some time to debrief with one another. But this was after a couple of years of being together. We didn't do that early in our conversations. It was something we did later. But everything pushes us a little bit further down in impacting our relationships and our understandings about things. But one of the things that was really, I just couldn't have done it otherwise, was that it was going to be an organization that was Blacks and whites. When I started this organization too, I said, it's going to have to be everyone coming together, or it doesn't make sense to me. We have a dues that you pay to belong to Spirit and Justice. We don't want anyone to think, well, that's exclusive. We don't want it to be exclusive. So what we have done is I gathered enough donors together. So when you come in, think of it in terms of your dues have been paid. You do not have to be excluded because of not being able to pay dues. Stayed at a pay it forward, believing in God's generosity and that people will be generous, and they have been. People are paying it forward, and it's working. So no one has to be excluded. I did just read a book I'd like to tell people about. It's called The Color of Compromise. It's about the Christian tradition's complicity and racism, and it's real. And I lift that up because if people are not wanting to be involved with religion because what they've seen that is not Christian at all, or I completely get it. And that book gets it too. And they explain. And that's why I understand why people would not be involved in religion. What I'd like to do is demonstrate the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is going to be teaching a certain theology, a certain dogma, a belief system. Spirituality for me is so wide open because it's an understanding that we are all connected in some way. We are just connected. But what happens to one is going to affect the other. And so you cannot have a group of people who are benefiting immensely without that not impacting another group that is going to be detrimentally affected. So you just have to always remember that we're all connected. To me, that's spirituality, that understanding of a connectedness. I understand, like, for example, you have Alcoholics Anonymous, a power greater than yourselves. So that might be your definition of God. It's an understanding of that we are all created, that we are not just the creator, we are created, and that we are all a part of what happens in this world. We are co-creators in what happens in this world. And so if I sit by and allow a system that limits the potential that a person can have in such a detrimental way, and I do nothing, then I am impacting in a terrible way what's going on in the world. I saw the signs recently, silence is violence, and it's like you're complicit if you see a system that is detrimentally affecting a huge group of people, or even one that you love, then you can't just sit back and do nothing. Now, I can't do everything. I can't affect everything. But the thing that's exciting about Together Baton Rouge is that there's so many people working on so many things that you know that you're a part of something that's making it better in lots of areas. And you put your gifts and your talents in that spot that works best. And you continue to build your capacity. That's another goal of both Spirit and Justice and Together Baton Rouge. Build the capacity of people. That's what I learned way back at Catholic Relief Services. Build the capacity of people to make the change that they need to make change. And you build that capacity, but you also connect everyone. You have to be connected. There's no power as individuals. You don't have to all go after the same issue, but you put your talents and skills and your passion where it is. But when it's time for us all to unite, like when Alton Sterling was shot, you can't just say, oh, that's not my issue. There's certain things where we all have to unite in order to affect that kind of change. And so it's a spirituality that understands that everybody has a potential that they can reach, and that I have to be a part of dismantling any systems that limit the potential, especially of those who are most vulnerable, marginalized, don't have the power that they need to affect change, and be out there doing it. I think that we just really zoned in on Black and white because of the history of racism against the Black community because of slavery. It's just a whole different ballgame. Now, we're also learning immigrants are another group now that are just as oppressed. I mean, if not more, they're grabbing mothers and fathers and children and separating them out, even as we speak in the present day. That kind of violence is really happening with immigrants as well. So we do have a lot of work to do. And I just feel like if we work on understanding the impact of racism, even at the Black and white level, you start seeing people for people. That affects your view of all people. And so this is just the thing that is right in our faces right now, is the Black-white issue. And it has to do with the history of slavery and 400 years of this slavery. That's going to take a lot to dismantle. When you address that deepest issue of racism, and it is so clear in our environment of slavery and Black and white, then you will begin to see that all people can be oppressed, and your eyes are open to more and more of that oppression. So we really want to address it as clearly as we can right now. Organizations like yours, like mine, like Together Baton Rouge, we cannot say vote for this person, don't vote for that person. We can't. What we can do is set up environments like an accountability session like we do in Together Baton Rouge, where we ask people what is important to you, and then we go to the candidate and say, this is what's important, where do you stand? And so to be engaged in those kind of conversations, don't let the politician tell you how they're going to take care of you. You tell the politician how you want to be taken care of, and you ask where they stand on that. And do vote. Oh my goodness, the power of voting. Do the census. The lines are drawn for this for Congress by the census. So if 50% of the African American folks in Louisiana are not counted, the lines will be drawn accordingly. So it is very, very important for people to get the census filled out. It takes 10 to 15 minutes of your time to affect 10 years. It affects 10 years of drawing the lines, of how we can be represented in Congress and at the state legislature. It affects funding, how the funding is dispersed by the numbers of people you have. We've had millions of children not counted, and we don't get the funds that would go to children if they were counted. So single mothers counting their children, that's a group that doesn't do the census. And it's just a really simple process of 10 to 15 questions. It's not intrusive. They don't ask for any financial information or your social security card. They just say how many people live in your home and what's the demographics of the people that live in your home. It seems like a scary thing. I kind of think that all that fear mongering out there might be the people that don't want people counted. And so we really have to think about what's going to be the impact if I do this. And so I really encourage that as well. So vote and do the census. And all of that goes back to we are all connected. What affects one affects us all. These systems are set up and they test groups. If we can oppress this group and nobody speaks up, then we can pick another group and do the same thing with them. And we can pick another group. It's all like a testing ground. And so we got to get to the root one and say, you're not going to oppress this group, and you're not going to go past this group because we're stopping you in your tracks here. Get to the group that's first that they're oppressing, and then they can't keep spreading that oppression to more and more groups.